When in Cairo, the situation seems to be changing literally hour by hour. Just before I came up here, I looked, and on the TV monitors, you see huge numbers of people going into Tahrir Square. Now, what's interesting today, on Friday, is this is the day that the protesters have said this is the day that Mubarak leaves. They are pouring into the square. They are being checked for weapons by the army, and the army seems to have gone back to really trying to secure the square, but a huge number of people are there. This contrasts with the last 2 days where we've just seen incredible violence that is absolutely orchestrated. It is people that we believe are police or security people who are out of uniform, and other thugs who've just been hired by the Mubarak government or the Egyptian authorities to attack the protesters who are clearly committed to and against incredible challenges have maintained a peaceful presence and protests. So it's very good to see that the violence seems to have de-escalated, but of course in the meantime we've heard numbers of people killed and thousands injured.
What's your reaction to the statements that have been made by the Mubarak authorities talking about security?
Yes, the Egyptian authorities, and Mubarak in particular, are trying to play a security versus human rights card. And this is an old dialogue for them. They've been using it with the West for years. They're using it right now to say, he's literally said, if I leave, the Muslim Brotherhood will take over. And what he's trying to say is to the Western governments whose support is necessary for him to stay, is you're going to end up with a radical Islamist terrorist group. Now, what's interesting about that is in the 1970s, the Muslim Brotherhood actually renounced violence, and they're not even named as a terrorist group on the U.S. watch list, for example. But he's definitely using that specter, and I think there's two things to recognize. One is for the last 30 years, since Sadat was assassinated, there's been a state of emergency in Egypt. And the Mubarak government, he's been the president this entire time, has used that to repress people, detain them, torture them, absolutely violate their rights. And he calls that stability. And in fact, what that is the instability that has led to this demand that he leave and that they be allowed to have their rights. And the people who have benefited from this supposed stability is the West, who feels comfortable having somebody that they trust in power. So it's actually their stability they care about, and they are giving him huge amounts of money and the military there and supporting him, even though they know absolutely well that he has run a repressive government that tortures. And in fact, when the United States first decided to outsource torture after 9/11, their destination of choice was Egypt.
Give us a little more about that political context, if you would. What is Egypt's position in the wider world, and therefore what pressures are other countries bringing to bear on this?
Well, Egypt is a key player. There's no doubt about that. And you'll see the difference in the response of the U.S. government to Tunisia and Egypt shows that Egypt has a much more significant geopolitical role. Partly that's because, of course, it's critical in any of the negotiations that happen with regard to Israel and Palestine. So it plays a role there. But it also is arguably the most powerful country in the North Africa, Middle East region. Plus the Suez Canal is another critical element. I mean, there are all these things that make it important. And that is why when the protests happen in Egypt, Western governments who do support Mubarak did not withdraw their support the way they did with Ben Ali of Tunisia, because they are worried about what the next government would be, and they would rather have somebody that they recognize as absolutely repressive, brutal, and corrupt, but their guy, than risk having actually a democratic government in Egypt that may not be bought off by their money.
Specifically around the protesters, what is Amnesty International's concerns about the way that they are being treated in this?
Well, first and foremost, our concern is for the protesters who have taken to the streets now for day on day on day, and the fact that they are being subjected to violent crackdowns. Today seems to be different. We certainly hope it stays that way. We cannot have orchestrated groups of thugs going in and attacking peaceful protesters. But there's a backstory to this, which is, of course, as many people will have heard, the arrest and detention of journalists and human rights activists and bloggers. by the Egyptian authorities. There have been several sweeps in the last few days. What they're obviously trying to do is shut down the sorts of Egyptian human rights activists who are really supporting these protests and are able to articulate so clearly why the demand for Mubarak to leave is justified. In addition, they're targeting journalists. They basically don't want they tried to shut down the media, and then they've opened it up, so state-controlled media they're now allowing to happen, but they're trying to get rid of all the foreign journalists who will be able to tell the story of what is happening in Cairo. And as I say, we don't know a lot more about what's happening outside of Cairo, and it will be very interesting to see there. And then finally, several human rights activists who, including 2 from Amnesty International, have been detained, and we're very concerned about their security, although frankly it is the Egyptians who are at the most risk, because they're the ones that are most likely to be ill-treated in detention. And so we're calling for everyone who's been caught up in these sweeps to be immediately and unconditionally released.